So I would like to start with this slide. Our founding father and former US President Thomas Jefferson gave a new meaning to soil. He stated that human civilization itself rests upon the soil. Similarly, former US President Franklin D. Roosevelt stated that the nation that destroys soil destroys itself. Now, let's look at what some of our brilliant minds of our society have to say about soils. I had an honor to listen to a talk of Dr. Jared Diamond. He studies why societies choose to succeed and why societies choose to collapse. In his a very famous book named Collapse, Jared Diamond mentioned that societies collapse when they destroy their environmental resources. Some of the examples he gave was soil erosion, salt accumulation in soils, and soil fertility losses. Jared is a recipient of National Medal of Science. He is a professor at UCLA, and he studies geography and anthropology. George Monbiot, a British environmental political activist and the founder of The Land Is Ours, stated that soil is such a magical substance that it transforms everything, every materials that it encounters. Now, our planet supports the livelihood of 7.6 billion population in 2018 right now. United Nations Fund for Population estimates that our population will grow about roughly 50% by 2100. So by 2100, we will be 11.2 billion people in this planet. The interesting thing in this growth is most of this growth, population growth, is going to happen in developing countries such as Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. The population of this part of the world like to live life of ours. For example, in essence, they want to consume same amount of energy that we do, and they want to consume same amount of natural resources that we do. However, even without considering the future increase in population, if the present population in developing countries use the same amount of resources we do, we need 2.5 or 2.5 more planets than we do now. But we have one planet. And in order to sustain the demand of future increase, our soils have to function well. Our soils have to provide food, energy, and nutritional demand of the future population growth. In order for that to happen, we need healthy soils. We need functional soils. We need soils that can sustain intensification of agroecosystems. We need soils that can provide us numerous ecosystem services upon which our livelihood depends. Now, let's learn from our history. In 1930s, we had Dust Bowl in US. That caused catastrophe in our society. The primary reason for that was unsustainable cropping system. It was monoculture of wheat. It was deep plowing of soil, that is breaking the soil aggregates. with no cover crop and prolonged drought, the problem was very harsh. So in essence, by doing this, what we did was we destroyed the soil aggregates. We burned the carbon that soil had. Now scientists have studied soils for a long time and extensively. United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization made 3 recommendations in order to avoid that kind of situation to happen in future. Their first recommendation was, do not disturb the soil. Have a minimum soil disturbance when you practice agriculture. Try to cover the soil like we try to cover our human body with permanent soil cover, some form of crop residue or mulch. And try to have a crop rotation or intercropping. Do not leave the soil bare. That was the findings or recommendations from Food and Agriculture Organization. So if you look at these 3 recommendations, what you get at it, that we have to bring the soil into its original condition as much as possible. These recommendations, if practiced, will form new soil aggregates. The soil will start to function as it used to do earlier. Now, before getting into too much of a detail, I would like to get into what a soil is. You guys might be wondering, I don't know what this guy is talking about. Soil is just dirt. However, I like to politely disagree with that. Soil is a 4-dimensional living system. We normally encounter with objects that are 3-dimensional, that has length, width, and depth. But what makes soil interesting is that soil property change with time. And that's why soil has a 4th dimension, time. Soil contains solids, liquids, gases, and organisms. And together they form a system which exists at the interface of atmosphere and lithosphere. Yes, this is the what soil I'm talking about. I would like to recognize the contribution of soil engineers, earthworms and termites. They work day and night to make our soil pulverized, to form new aggregates, to mix the nutrients, and to provide a number of ecosystem services. Now, when you take a handful of soil, what it contains? Half of the soil that you have in your hands is solids that can have about 45% of soil minerals and 5% organic matter. Remaining 1/4 is water, and the rest of the quarter is air. However, the proportion of these soil ingredients changes with soil type and the human disturbance. The story of soil science will not complete if we don't recognize the contributions of these 2 famous soil scientists. V.V. Dokuchev, a Russian geographer, was the first one to document that soil properties are not static. These are dynamic. Soil property change over time. Because of his contribution, soil scientists around the world consider V.V. Dokuchev as father of soil science. Hans Jenny, a Berkeley pedologist, for the first time came up with quantitative pedology. He stated that soil at a certain location can be predicted as a function of climate, organism, relief, parent material, and time. Since then, many forms of this equation have been used in soil science literature to predict soil properties around the world. Probably this is the one equation that is most famous and highly cited in soil science literature. Now let's talk about soil formation and soil loss. You may have a question like how long it takes a soil to form. The answer is very long, long time. In absence of abrupt climate change and human interference, at a geological soil erosion and deposition, it takes about 500 years to form 1 inch of soil. However, geological soil erosion is a good thing. Due to geological soil erosion and deposition, we have the most fertile soils in our planet. The soils of Indo-Gangetic Plain in India, the soils of Nile Delta in Egypt, and the soils of our Midwest are a result of soil erosion and deposition in absence of human interference and abrupt climate change. However, because of the conventional agriculture, we lose about 1.6 inches of soil in 10 years. By breaking the clods, by using pulverizing the soils, and many more activities that we do upon soil. So you can lose soil 50 to 100 times faster than soil forms. With these two pictures, I am trying to show that now we are living in the era of endangered soils. Because of the abrupt climate change and human selfishness, we are basically losing the soil in its entirety. We are losing the soil properties. Now, not all soils are same. Like humans, like plants, soils have also names. Soils are different types. It is pride for us that United States was the first country which started giving name to soils. We call it US Soil Taxonomy. According to US Soil Taxonomy, we have 12 soil orders in the planet. These soils can be of different color, different texture, and different functions. For example, let's look at anti-soils. So you will see there is no horizontal differentiation. We call it soil horizons. However, if you look at ulti-soils, these are the highly weathered soils, very deep. You cannot see the bedrock in this profile. Anti-soil are the soils which have just starting to form. These are the youngest soils in the planet. Ulti-soils are the soils which are very old. They have, you can compare with a child with wrinkle and no wrinkle. So anti-soils doesn't have any wrinkles. It does not have any genetic horizon. However, the ulti-soils have a lot of them because this is old soil. Soil scientists or pedologists are working to include 2 more soil orders in this list. They will basically resemble the impact of human civilization in soils. Very soon, we will have soil order called anthrosols and technosols. So the soils, for example, paddy soils, we have changes its morphology, its property, its biology, everything by cultivating paddy in large area in our planet. Similarly, technosols are the soils that are disturbed by industrial activities. One example is coal mining. So soon we will have 2 more soil orders in our list. Now let's look at this global map. I would like to point your attention to these blue areas at the top. These areas have a typical soil, it's called jelly soil. It has a unique function, unique character, that these soils freeze and thaw with seasonal changes in temperature. So if anyone is interested to study or to understand how climate warming is impacting these kind of soils, jelly soils are a very good candidate. If we look at US, the green portions are the molly soils. These are the soils that are most productive in planet. These are the soils which formed under grasslands. They have very high organic carbon and very high nutrient holding capacity. Now let's zoom into US. If you consider Puerto Rico and Alaska, we have all kinds of soil in US that exist in this planet. So I take this as a human diversity. Like we are as diverse in humans, we are so diverse in soils. Now, as I earlier said, that this green portion are molly soils, and there are also alphy soils. These two soil orders make the bread basket of the world. I would like to salute all the farmers of US because they produce 25% of the food for global consumption. Now let's go to Illinois, where our state is. Illinois has basically 5 soil orders. These are alphisol, antisol, histosol, inceptisol, and mollisol. The name are given because of their specific property, because of the way they function. Drummer is our state soil. Drummer is the name of a soil series, and it is one among soil series of mollisols. Drummer extends in 1.5 million acres in Illinois. Now, before I go to what soil does for us, do you guys have any question? Or can I have an honor to answer? Or shall I do it at the end? What do you guys want? Thank you. Now let's go to soil functions. After briefly introducing what soils are, how many kinds of soils we have, let's try to learn what soil does for us. So we all know number one function of soil is it produces food. Currently, we cultivate about 38% of land surface to produce food. While doing that, we emit about 30 to 35% of greenhouse gases to atmosphere. And as I explained earlier, soils of Midwest alone supply 25% of global food supply. Despite this, 14% of our population does not have sufficient food to eat, and 36% of global population is malnourished. Another important function that soil does, it produces energy. One example is bioenergy, crop residues. Currently, United States is the #1 ethanol producer in the world. However, I have to acknowledge that not all the ethanol that is produced today comes from bioenergy crops, but there is a significant portion of corn also goes in ethanol production in US. There are peat soils. These kind of soils are harvested to produce energy. Countries like Norway, Sweden, and Finland, they derive 20% of their national energy by burning peats. and the role of peat soils to produce energy globally is about 6%. Then soil produces oil seed crops, which are used for biodiesel production. Globally, European Union is the largest producer of biodiesel, and I guess US is catching up. Similarly, in large part of the world, cooking is done by burning biomass. So a significant portion of our population uses biomass as a cooking energy. I would like to point that this article, a nice piece written by McDonough and Braungart in 2013, they published an article called Replacing Oil by Soil. So if you guys have time, it will be a great read. After producing food and energy, soil also conserves biodiversity. Soil is a habitat of a number of micro and macroorganisms. 1 gram of soil can contain millions of microbes and several thousand bacterial species. 1 kilogram of soil can contain as many as total human population type of microbes in mere 1 kilogram of soil. So basically, soil sustains the biodiversity. However, our knowledge is very less about who lives below ground. With our advancement in microbiology, in the science of identifying microbes, currently we know less than 1% of soil microbes. Soils reserves fresh water. Soil stores green and blue water for ecosystem productivity. So those of you who are not aware with blue and green, because I have heard water is colorless. So our engineering colleagues, who do this life cycle analysis, they have identified as the water that comes from precipitation and stays in the root zone as green water, and the water that you take from subsurface or surface and use it for agriculture and industrial activity, that is blue water. So soil is a huge reservoir of both blue and green water. As the water moves through the soil profile, as the number of profile I showed earlier, soil filters and purifies water through its physical, chemical, and biological properties. Soil also denatures pollutants that are created by such as heavy metals or industrial wastes. Soil denatures everything. Another important function that soil does for us is it provides resilience to our society. These two figures are showing that the magnitude of carbon we emit to the atmosphere, roughly land is taking the same amount of carbon in the same trajectory. By doing this, it is providing an enormous service to humanity. Currently, land absorbs about 5 petagram of carbon. 1 petagram is billion ton or gigaton. So these are 2017 numbers. About 32% of what we emit into the atmosphere comes down to the land, comes down to the soil through vegetation. However, this rate has approximately doubled in the last 40 years. And many science need to be done to understand why is this happening and to how long it will happen to continue. In addition to carbon sequestration, Soil also regulates greenhouse gases. And the most important thing, as I earlier said, soil provides us resilience against extreme climatic events. Soil has a buffering capacity through its biological and chemical properties. Soil is a source of a number of raw materials. For example, clay soils are used for brick production, and bricks are a major source for urbanization in many parts of the world. I earlier explained soil provides peats, and peats are used for electricity generating industry. Before having an opportunity to travel to Alaska, I had no idea that gold is extracted from soil. So to harvest gold, enormous amount of soil is harvested, pulverized, broken down, and through chemical analysis, people extract gold. Soil is also a source of a number of antibiotics and pharmaceutical companies. Soil provides raw materials to them. No one knows this better than our archaeological colleagues in Argonne, that soil preserves climate, human, and planetary history. If you want to know about past climate, you don't have to look at the sky. You have to dig deeper. And it's the soil that preserves the planetary history. Soil also cycles a number of elements. Agronomists call it nutrients, and physicists or chemists call it elements. Soil stores and cycles carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. Soil transfers complex substances to its elemental form and provide that elemental form to all kinds of living beings, plants and animals. I explained different kind of ecosystem services. They are not the all. I have just briefly mentioned few of them. Now through this table, I'm trying to link which ecosystem services are provided by which specific soil properties. For example, physical properties like texture, structure, porosity, and surface area provides services like climate moderation, history preservation, and water storage. Chemical properties such as nutrient content, cation exchange capacity, and pH provides crop productivity, raw material supply, and elemental cycling. Similarly, biological properties such as soil organic carbon, species diversity, soil respiration provides biodiversity conservation, waste decomposition, and energy production. I would like to mention again that these are not the entire ecosystem services that we derive from soils. Soils provide numerous other ecosystem services, and there are many people are trying to study this. I will give you one example. A colleague of mine from Wageningen University, Netherlands, she is initiating a project to quantify the soil's role in humanity. She is launching a project called Soil Footprint. So that project will basically quantify the role of soil in the services that we derive. The idea is similar like carbon footprint. For any product we go to buy at a store, there is a carbon footprint mentioned. So it is a similar idea. Now, a global authority in the science of soil carbon sequestration, Ratan Lal, stated that soil organic matter generates and regulates every ecosystem service that sustains life on earth. So he basically said that if you have resources, limited resources to study one soil property, what you should study? You should study soil organic carbon. Because soil organic carbon has an ability to change, to alter other soil properties in the soil system. With this figure, I have tried to link how soil organic carbon impacts physical, chemical, biological, and ecological properties. For example, the content of soil organic carbon impacts water movement and the physical structure of soil. So if a soil, let's assume it's an empty soil, soil at its formation, does not have soil aggregates, does not have horizons. If you add organic matter to that kind of soil, it will start change. The water movement, the structure, the aggregation will start changing. Similarly, soil organic carbon changes the biological properties, such as by providing energy to the microbiota, it will enhance the biodiversity of a soil. Soil organic carbon also changes cation exchange capacity. It basically acts like a sponge to retain soil moisture and nutrients. Similarly, soil organic carbon content increases crop productivity and elemental cycling. So basically, soil organic carbon makes soil a living system. Now, what is soil organic matter? Soil organic matter roughly has 58% of soil organic carbon. It is plant and animal residue at various stages of decomposition. Soil organic matter can contain cells and tissues of soil organisms and various substances that are synthesized by these organisms that live in soil. Tentatively, soil organic matter can have 33 to 50% of actively decomposing organic matter and the organic matter that has been attached to its mineral. That's called stabilized soil organic matter. Less than 5% of soil organic matter is living organisms, and about 10% is plant residue. Soil carbon is also an important driver of the global carbon cycle. Soil stores the largest amount of carbon in the terrestrial ecosystem. We as a humanity emit about 9 petagram, 9 billion tons of carbon every year to atmosphere. Out of this, land absorbs 3 petagram carbon in the soil and its plants. And currently, half of what we emit through industry and land use change stays in the atmosphere. So you can imagine if soil stopped functioning, I assume the carbon concentration in atmosphere will increase much, much more rapidly. Now I would like to go into what Argonne does in soil science research. So at Argonne, we use field and lab observations, remote sensing and environmental data sets, and geospatial and process-based models to understand how soil property change with climate and land use. The figures I'm showing are our colleagues who are working in our laboratories, in the facilities at Argonne National Lab. One additional thing that also we do is we develop model benchmarks and we quantify uncertainties in Earth system model projections. The figure on your left, this figure is showing my version of Earth system model. It's a simplification. So what a Earth system model is, it's basically a model that has all components of Earth system, which are coupled through a coupler. So this coupler provides an amazing ability to Earth system models. Because of this, you can study feedbacks. That means if you change, let's say, carbon concentration in atmosphere, how it is going to impact the land system. Or if you change land use in the land, how it is going to impact the atmosphere. These kind of studies can be done by using Earth system models. United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change uses these kind of models to study the future of our planet, to study how climate might change in future, or what will be the state of our ecosystems in future. The figure on your right is showing some example of Earth system model representation. These come from the land component of Earth system model, and we try to understand the differences between these model projections and the observations we have. We try to understand what is causing the differences and how can we reduce the uncertainties that current Earth system models have. Now with this, I would like to go to a slide which shows our history of soil science in Argonne. So a project on restoration ecology started around 1980s, and we started studying soil carbon dynamics around 1987 or 1990. And a project on soil carbon sequestration was launched around 1998, and a project on ecosystem carbon dynamics was launched around 2005. Similarly, we started a bioenergy feedstocks project around 2007. And in 2013, we started studying permafrost soil carbon. In 2014, we started another project of model benchmarking and uncertainty quantification. So this slide in summary tells what we in Argonne are doing in soil science research. Now earlier I talked a lot about soil aggregates. So what a soil aggregate is? Soil aggregate is a naturally occurring cluster, a group of soil particles where the attraction forces between the particles are much stronger than the forces in between aggregates. This is not a new concept. This was proposed by Martin and colleagues back in 1955. The figure that I am showing in this slide, these are the soil aggregates of our site in Fermilab. And these images are showing these aggregates at different scales. So in essence, soil aggregates can be very complex. Our colleague Julie Jastrow and Mike Miller, they proposed a new theory about soil macro aggregate formation. This is one original contribution that Argonne has in soil science literature. Before this theory, before this conceptual diagram, we used to study soil aggregates at different fractions. For example, of fractions that can extend from very small fraction to very large fraction. However, our colleagues Julie Jastrow and Mike Miller proposed that you cannot study soil aggregates like that. There can be micro aggregates inside macro aggregates. There can be plant and fungal debris, silt and clay-sized particles, and they arrange in each other to form a macro aggregate. with pore space and organic material inside them. I have seen this diagram being used at multiple meetings with respect. Another thing that we study in Argonne is we try to understand how plant-soil microbe interaction changes with change in land use or with change in climate. For example, if you take this root system out and put a new kind of root system, this is going to change the biogeochemistry of soils. And we at Argonne try to understand that. In another study that we are conducting for a long time in Fermilab at our research site, we are trying to quantify how rapidly carbon depleted after converting the prairie into croplands and how the carbon is increasing after restoring our prairies. So the data, this data is showing the portion of carbon that soils can absorb or soils can sequester. This is roughly about 30 to 50% of what we lost when prairie was converted to agriculture. This figure is showing that we regained soil aggregates roughly equal to the prairie remnant just in 15 years. So 15 years was a sufficient time to rebuild our macro aggregates, rebuild our soil aggregation. However, the soil carbon recovery was much slower than aggregation. You see, this point is showing the carbon content in remnant prairie. However, our carbon concentration is linearly increasing. So there is a lot of gap in between these two figures, and that is showing how much carbon the soils at our site can rebuild. Our colleague Rose Matamala led a study and they try to understand at what rate the carbon is changing in restored prairies. And their findings suggest that soil carbon is changing roughly up to half a ton carbon per hectare per year in restored prairies. Our another colleague, Sarah O'Brien, led another study where she did a chronosequence and she identified how the soil carbon is changing in different kind of prairie grasses. Her findings suggest that in maize prairies or the prairies that can be seasonally wet, the carbon sequestration rate is different. And these lines show the linear trend of soil carbon sequestration in those kind of prairies. We at Argonne also study the impacts of land use change. For example, when prairie is converted to cropland or when prairie is restored. Using eddy covariance technology, we measure net ecosystem exchange of water, heat, and carbon at our research sites. This figure is showing that our prairies are still sequestering carbon a lot. However, the croplands, the net sequestration is close to zero. That means the croplands are not sequestering as much carbon as the prairies are at our research site. At Argonne, we also use soil reflectance to study soil properties. We try to understand basically the chemical composition of soil organic matter by studying the soil spectra. And we use these soil reflective properties to predict the soil organic carbon vulnerability. That means upon disturbance, how this carbon might transfer to atmosphere as CO2. In another study, we looked at the impacts of land use change on biomass productivity and soil carbon sequestration across the US croplands. This study was an excellent example of coupling process-based models with geospatial models. The figure on your left or right, I don't know, for me it's left, is showing the crop water requirement needs. So the blue areas are the areas where you have to irrigate the crops in order to get economic biomass productivity. The white areas are the areas where you can harvest the biomass at the rate of 10 tons per hectare per year without irrigation. And green areas are the croplands distribution in US, where you can harvest miscanthus biomass to its potential yield without irrigation. This figure is showing that if that happens, how the soil organic carbon might change in the croplands. So the green areas are the areas where you will have maximum carbon benefit, and the blue areas are the areas where the soil will sequester less amount of carbon. Now the objective of this study was not to recommend that let's convert all the croplands to bioenergy production, but the idea was to identify the hot spots, the most suitable croplands where you can grow miscanthus biomass without irrigation, and to identify the croplands where you can get maximum carbon benefit. We also study Earth system model benchmarking. We conduct Earth system model benchmarking. This is one example that we did in permafrost, northern circumpermafrost region. This image is basically showing the difference between the average of 4 Earth system model projections and observations. The blue areas in the slide are showing the areas where the difference between observations and models are very high. Or in essence, the models under-predict the carbon than what actually exists in nature. The brown areas are the areas where models over-predict the soil organic carbon, and the white areas are the areas where there is tentative agreement. So you will see that the agreement between observations and models is very less. This is the result of current CIMI 5, so the IPCC report. In order to match, or in order to have a tentative agreement, we identified different research strategies. So we reported that we have to improve the number and robustness of the observations that we have in this region. We have to predict the spatial and vertical distribution of soil organic carbon stocks using observations. We have to characterize carbon forms and predict their fate. And we have to use observation-based SOC estimates to inform models. And we found that to a meter depth, the disparity is very high. In another Earth system model benchmarking activity, we used soil observations, data of soil forming factors, and geospatial modeling to create observation-based distribution of active layer thickness across Alaska. And the figure on the top is what we are getting from Earth system model. It's an average of 4 Earth system models. So our prediction is about that the active layer thickness can range from 0.14 to about 1 meter depth. And the spatial average is about half a meter. However, there is a great disparity between this map and this map. The areas which observations suggest that active layer thickness is very shallow, the models are suggesting that active layer thickness is very deep. Now, the reason behind this disparity is that the models currently think that active layer thickness is a function of surface atmospheric temperature. However, we found that active layer thickness at a location can be a function of temperature, land cover type, and slope angle. So, in order to match these differences, the models need to incorporate the impact of these environmental controllers. We also conducted a scaling study. So, for example, when we go to field, we collect sample, we observe certain set of environmental controllers. Now, the question is, to what spatial extent the observations that we made are valid, and after what spatial distance the observations that we made may not be valid or may change. This plot is showing that the spatial heterogeneity in carbon decreases exponentially in permafrost systems up to about 500 meters. So that means the inferences that we made at a certain location cannot be valid beyond 500 meters. Our results are showing that the spatial structure at observation can only be valid up to 100 meter spatial scale. And the environmental controls on carbon stocks changes with scale. So at one scale, you can have certain environmental controllers. At other scale, you can have different environmental controllers. We also quantify the magnitude and distribution of uncertainties not only in models, but also in our observations. So this kind of study can help efforts for field sampling. For example, people can focus on sampling the areas where the uncertainty is higher, such as Bering tundra ecoregion of Alaska. Their uncertainty in soil organic carbon is greatest. Similarly, the uncertainty in active layer thickness is highest in Bering taiga. So field sampling effort can be made to those ecoregions to reduce the uncertainty in observations. We also developed a methodology to capture the spatial heterogeneity of soil carbon under changing climate. By using soil carbon observations, data of soil forming factors, and geospatial modeling, we conducted this kind of study. So our recommendation is that the current sampling distribution in Alaska are not able to capture the spatial heterogeneity of carbon in Alaska. If you want to reduce the existing uncertainty within 5% of the mean at present, you will need 484 more new samples. And we distributed those requirements of samples in a fashion such that they can capture the spatial heterogeneity of soil forming factors. We also found that the future climate projections in Alaska will not dramatically alter the number of sampling requirements. What does that mean is the climate warming that we are expecting by 2100 may not spatially change the distribution of soil organic carbon stocks. That means the areas with higher carbon can still remain the areas with higher carbon. The areas with lower carbon will remain as the areas with lower carbon by 2100. So, in summary, I tried to convince you that to accommodate 50% more guests by 2100 in our planet, we need improved soil functions. For that to happen, we have to prevent soil degradation and soil loss from accelerated soil erosion, desertification, and salinization. We also need to adopt conservation soil management practices. And I also showed that by managing soil organic carbon alone, many soil functions and ecosystem services can be optimized. And Argonne will keep on creating new knowledge to improve our understanding about the most critical resource that we have in our planet. Now let's imagine if soil had stopped functioning, what could have happened? I think probably we would still be looking for life like we are looking now in Mars. I strongly believe that soil is the ultimate reality. Soil is the place where we all will take our final rest one day. Therefore, soil health is human health, and soil security is human security. With this, I would like to acknowledge my Argonne colleagues and other colleagues from around the world who have contributed to my science, because science has becoming more and more interdisciplinary, more and more collaborative effort. And I would like to acknowledge all of my colleagues who have contributed to my science. I feel fortunate to state that throughout my career, since I was a graduate student till now I am a staff member at Argonne, all my research has been supported by only one agency, that is Department of Energy, Office of Science. I sincerely appreciate their help in helping my science. And at the end, I would like to thank you all for your patience and for coming here on Saturday. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Umakant. Thank you. We have time for questions for sure. I know folks are anxious to ask. I think we've all gotten a much greater appreciation for soil and what it means to us in terms of our daily activities and lives. Thank you. Let's open a question right down here. Let's wait until we get you a microphone.
I'm curious, when you showed us the chart of the various types of soils that exist around the world, is that stages that soils go through, or can you have certain areas on the planet that would only produce one type of soil no matter what you do to it? And that ties into my second part of my question. Are you doing any research on how to jumpstart nature's way of creating the soil?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for asking this question. And this question is now making me to think as well. So to answer your first question, can there be a different kind of soil than what it has in our planet now? That is your question. The answer is, if there is absence of human intervention and abrupt climate change, probably the answer is no. The similar kind of, so soils form, as I earlier stated, that due to interaction of different soil forming factors, climate, organism, parent material, time. If all these factors remain same, and if we do not alter, let's say if there is a forest, we don't cut it, we don't put something else there, then probably the soil will continue to be in its making, like It can be antisol, it can be histosol, it can be altisol, or it can be other anthrosol. However, the second part of your question is, at Argonne, are we trying to jumpstart, or are we trying to make certain different kind of soils? Is that your question was? Yes. The answer is no. Both your questions, my answer is no. What we are trying to do at Argonne is we are trying to understand how certain human activity changes soil properties. So in our research plots at Fermilab, we have converted a prairie to a cropland. Now we are monitoring how it is altering the different soil properties. Similarly, we are not doing that study, but many of our other colleagues in different parts of the world are studying the impact of increased CO2 concentration. So they are artificially increasing the concentration of CO2 at certain location, and they are monitoring how the changes are happening in soil system and vegetation. So that is my answer to your question. Thank you.
Question back here. Let's wait until we get a microphone.
Yeah. I'm from Nepal, and I'm very pleased to see a colleague from Nepal talking about soil science. It's a pride for us. Thank you, Umakant. I have a little bit of strange question, maybe. In one of our oldest scripture, Time Unknown, there is a story about the infertility and drought causing food scarcity and sufferings of people. And the name of the king Prithu at that time was able to bring the changes and reduce or provide the necessary foods and bring balance in the system. I like to relate that with your study and your colleagues, what it will take for soil scientists to convince the government and the agriculture and other industrialists to act in a balanced way. Probably this is a vague question, but I request if you can point out some suggestions. Thank you.
I have a luxury to reply the way I want. Oh, thank you. So there can be different players in order to address the soil sustainability. We all can have different roles. I am doing from my part is I am trying to create new knowledge, trying to document them in scientific literature with a hope that my findings will ultimately go through our decision makers and they will act in a manner that helps our sustainability. However, I'm seeing various industries, they are doing really good job. So for example, the company, well, I will not name it here, but they have provided a lot of funding to my PhD supervisor, Ratan Lal, to study the sustainability or the soil carbon sequestration rates in dairy farms. So I assume there are many people or different parts of our society are coming together in order to sustain soils, because now they are seeing the dramatic changes that's occurring because of the abrupt climate change and because of the unjustifiable human decisions. So all I can hope that this will be also be case in our government and in our systems as well. And I would like to stop by. Maybe Paul can add something more.
For real estate purposes, like the beachfronts, that sometimes they want to have a nice beachfront, so they bring sand, maybe from another part, and they dump it to make the beach front a little bit larger. Are they affecting the flora and fauna when they do that? I mean, do they just bring sand from anywhere, or would they bring sand that will be similar to the actual site? And then the other question will be, like, for instance, in the Sahara Desert, are there any plans to grow, to change the Sahara Desert to a more prosperous land for crops?
So your first question was, can we extend the beach size by putting more sand into it and not have dramatic environmental consequences? So I would like to state that probably moderation in everything is good, but you should not try to alter the nature. So one, I would say, rather dramatic example for that case is, you all know the country Netherlands. So what they used to do is, in other parts of the world, sea level is rising and it's creating havoc in the civilization, in human population. But they were actually encroaching the sea. So they will make a big dam inside the sea, and they will pump this water out, and they will start cultivating that soil. However, they have realized that this is not a sustainable way, and they have started abandoning that kind of practices in order to promote sustainability. So to answer your first question, I think if you do that in a moderation, don't be too greedy, don't try to take too much money, probably you'll be better off, rather than encroaching too much. Otherwise, it will react. And we are seeing the impacts in natural hazards in many parts of the world, including US. And your second question was, can there be plans that they can alter the biogeochemistry of Sahara? Now, to answer that question, my answer is vegetation is just the one component. In order to have an impact in soils, you need to have all these 5 components that I just explained. You need to have a right climate, you need to have a right parent material, you need to have a right topography, and then only these factors can interact. Sahara, there is no vegetation growth. The problem might have been water availability, or the soil moisture is insufficient to sustain the plant. So until that is changed, I don't think you can have a enormous vegetation growth in that part of the world.
Question over here, please.
Eroded soil has to go somewhere. What are the positive and negative effects on land and sea where this the erosion is deposited?
Brilliant. I like this question, by the way. In soil science, there is a debate right now, sir, whether soil erosion is a source or sink of atmospheric carbon. So for example, when soil carbon is eroded from a terrestrial surface, for example, farmland, so it moves through river tributaries and ultimately it goes to ocean. So in ocean, yes, you are sequestering carbon. In crop, yes, you are losing carbon. There is no scientific answer, a correct scientific answer to that question. A correct and robust answer can be given by monitoring the carbon that come out from the croplands, and we have to track using isotopes how it moves through the tributaries. So you have to study soil carbon, you have to study the water carbon, and you have to follow how it moves. Now the correct answer would be, from the total carbon that moved from certain area, how much of that get oxidized on the way while moving from its source let's say cropland, to sink ocean. So I don't think there is a scientific consensus now. The person who is studying ocean will think it's a good idea. More carbon is depositing in oceans. But the people who are agronomists, they will never agree to that. They would say that it is a bad thing. My fertile soil is going away. So I think the answer can be from the angle you are looking at. And the whole carbon budget need to be done in order to have a proper answer to that question.
One more question over here, and then I have a question for you, please.
And under a cation exchange, my understanding is that that helps plants grow. If you have a poor cation exchange, it doesn't grow very well. So are there methods to improve cation exchange to reduce products used to grow crops?
Yes, your statement is 200% correct. As you have more cation exchange capacity, you have more ability to hold nutrients in the soil. So that is the reason why molly soils are most productive soils in the planet, because they have very high cation exchange capacity. Now, can you increase the cation exchange capacity that is inherent in the soil? The answer is yes, you can. But you have to add more soil organic matter. When the soil organic matter binds with mineral particles, they create new avenues for increasing cation exchange capacity. That is the answer.
Very good. Umakant, my question is really, I know you're from Nepal. How did you become so passionate, so interested in soil science? Please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to explain. So I think all it takes is a really good teacher. I had a brilliant teacher in my undergraduate school who is such a magnificent that he can teach any subject, I think, that you give it to him very well, very thoroughly. So I was staying in Kathmandu, and my college was, you need to take a bus drive of a whole day to reach the campus. And on the way, I used to see the rivers, and all the rivers are basically, mudded, like very laden with soil particles. So I used to think, man, like, how much carbon are we exporting to India? And can someone has quantified this? We know, like, Nepal is a small country. We are not economically as strong as our neighbors. But maybe is this the one reason? Like, we are losing so much soil and so much nutrients to those guys, and we are not being compensated for that. So if I can do something in this domain, wouldn't it be amazing? So that, and in addition to a very good teacher of soil science, motivated me to study soil science. And I have been fortunate that I don't have to change my discipline. Like, I have been studying soils right from undergraduate to PhD to postdoc, and now my job is also in soil science. This is a cool thing. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you, please.